The Flaxborough Summer Carnival had promised gaiety, bunting, and the kind of orderly cheer that could be advertised with a council seal. Instead, by 3:30, the market square had become the stage for a calamity that the town would recount for years. It began innocuously enough. A brass band in hired uniforms blasting Colonel Bogey with the tact of a train whistle, their cheeks reddening as though each note might burst a blood vessel. Children squealed through paper masks, the sort sold at the haberdashery for pennies. The mayor, perspiring in his ceremonial sash, attempted to mount the dais steps with a dignity that fooled no one. He had a speech folded in his hand and a benevolent smile fastened to his face, though both would be discarded before the day was out. He raised his arms for silence. Then, quite against the program, the silence was shattered by a communal gasp. Heads tilted upward. There, from the top window of the Corn Exchange, a body hung upside down, coattails dangling like grotesque bunting, his shirt front blotched with spreading darkness. For several stunned seconds, the crowd assumed it must be some carnival trick. But when the figure swung slowly, face pallid and unmoving, a scream broke free, and the brass band faltered into silence. The mayor's speech fluttered to the cobbles, his words reduced to confetti. In less time than it took the police van to arrive, the town's opinion factory began its churn. "He'd been in drink since morning," asserted the butcher, telling it as firmly as if he'd poured the gin himself. "Slipped trying to hang bunting." The verger of Saint. Swithins, lips pursed with solemn satisfaction, murmured to a cluster of parishioners, "It was debt, you may rely upon it." Horse racing, the most dreadful sums in the Lamb and Flag. A fellow in shirt-sleeves tapped the side of his glass. "No accident. Carnival or not, someone pushed him. Mark my words." At the greengrocer's, Councillor Hargreaves brushed questions aside with a harumph. Let health and safety determine it. Idle gossip never helped any town. Yet by tea-time, there were a dozen theories, each contradicting the next, each told with the assurance of eyewitnesses who had in fact seen very little at all. The carnival continued, but every laugh carried a quaver, and every drumbeat seemed to echo with unease. Inspector Purbright appeared without fanfare. His manner was that of one attending a sick room rather than a crime scene, quiet, deliberate, faintly apologetic to the trampled grass. By the time he stepped into the square, the body had been spirited away, the sheet over it more suggestive than concealing. Purbright crouched where the crowd had thinned, studying the cobblestones beneath the window. A ribbon lay there, torn raggedly as though jerked free in haste. Beside it, a child's carnival mask, its painted grin smeared into something sinister. More telling still was the small brass badge that gleamed in the dust, its pin bent, its emblem unmistakable, the crest of a local lodge. Sergeant Love, hovering behind with earnest alarm, cleared his throat. "Dropped from the fellow's pocket, sir." Purbright touched the badge lightly, as though testing its willingness to explain itself. "Perhaps. But it doesn't seem at ease here, does it? Rather like its owner." His words carried not accusation, but the air of a man noting the weather. What struck Purbright more than the trinkets was the peculiar hush settling over the square. The carnival, by sheer civic stubbornness, continued. Dancers whirled in bright skirts, a choir of children warbled an anthem, a conjurer shuffled his cards, yet the laughter was brittle, the clapping tentative. This was Flaxborough, where scandal was usually a matter for whispers behind teapots, not a corpse displayed before the mayor's podium. Purbright straightened, brushed his knees, and considered the banner stretched between two lamp-posts. "Welcome to our carnival of unity." "Unity," he murmured, "is bunting of a kind. Festive, yes, but one tug is enough, and down it comes Sergeant Love, never sure whether these remarks were intended for him, blinked solemnly. The remark drifted to those within earshot, who shivered at the suggestion of meanings deeper than they cared to pursue. The mayor attempted, against reason, to resume the ceremony, but his speech was now damp and his audience less willing. A cheer from the far side of the square diverted attention to a troupe of acrobats who had resumed their routine, determined to supply merriment, if only to drown unease. For a moment the crowd clapped, eager for distraction. Then a young clerk elbowed through the throng, face pale, waistcoat askew, breath ragged from running. He thrust an envelope into the hands of the nearest constable, who passed it swiftly to the inspector. Purbright unfolded the slip of paper with his customary mild curiosity. He read the message once, then again. It contained only 7 words. He wasn't meant to be the one. The inspector folded it carefully, tucked it into his pocket, and regarded the dancers, whose leaps now seemed grotesquely forced. Around him, the citizens of Flaxborough straightened their shoulders, whispered into their neighbors' ears, and prepared their next theories. The Carnival scandal had only just begun, and already it promised to outshine the fireworks. By early evening, the bunting on the market square looked like a smile held too long. The crowd had thinned to the stubborn and the curious. Stall holders stacked unsold toffee apples with the careful reverence of undertakers. Purbright and Sergeant Love crossed to the Corn Exchange, where a caretaker with an iron-grey bun and a keyring like a charm bracelet awaited them. She introduced herself as Mrs. Pegg and unlocked the side door as if releasing a secret she did not entirely approve of. Inside, the stairwell smelt of old, paper and fresh varnish. On the landing, the open window gave a cut-out view of the square where the dais stood forlorn and empty. Purbright paused at the sill. The paint was scuffed in 2 places, heel marks with a fine grit ground into them. A length of scarlet ribbon hung from the latch, its end torn to a furry fringe. Love followed the inspector's gaze and said with the optimism of a man reaching a conclusion in time for his tea, "Bunting, sir?" Purbright tested the torn edge between finger and thumb. "Bunting is cut with shears." This was removed by haste or by fear. Mrs. Pegg cleared her throat in a manner that suggested she only did so when something necessary was about to be said. "He came up alone, sir. Mr. Roland Pike, treasurer of the Carnival Fund, always tidy with figures. Polite to a fault," she sniffed, and the iron bun trembled. "He said the confetti cannons needed checking, as the Queen was to wave from here at 1:15. I left him the key and went down again to shoo away children with sticky fingers. When the scream went up, I looked up and—" She closed her eyes. Not for drama, but because the picture did not bear frequent viewing. "The Queen was due to stand at this window?" Purbright asked. 3:15 on the dot. She throws pennies. Tradition, you see. Little ones bring jam jars." Mrs. Pegg indicated a cardboard box by the wall where a broken clasp glittered among a tangle of sashes. "Her sash gave trouble, though. I had it mended twice." Fastener wouldn't hold Purbright considered this while Love made a note with the look of a man this very moment becoming wise. "Who chose the window?" the inspector asked. "The committee." Mr. Pike had everything in neat columns. He kept the program proofed till the last minute. Wouldn't trust a thing to chance downstairs in the small office. Purbright examined the program sheet Scott taped to a corkboard. In a square of light cast by the desk lamp, times and items stepped across the page in tidy type. Procession, speech, acrobats, Queen's wave, choir, fireworks rehearsal. He ran a finger beneath Queen of the Carnival, window of Corn Exchange, 3:15. Beside the list, a brass-headed pin made a precise little hole, as though a careful man had checked the line and checked it again. Love found a ledger on the desk with columns so exact that one might have used them to set a watch by. The last entry recorded a payment for ribbon, crimson, 4 yards. "Investigation board," Love said, half to himself, as if approving an idea that had just visited him. Back at the station, Purbright accepted this suggestion with a nod. On a blackboard, he chalked 4 words in a square: ribbon, badge, mask, note. He drew thin lines between them, not because lines solved anything, but because it soothed the eye. "One begins," he said, stepping back, "not with the thing that shocks, but with the thing that doesn't belong. Shock makes a fine curtain, but it hides the furniture." Love pointed at the badge in its evidence envelope. "Local lodge, sir. St. Oswald's Benevolent." The steward identified it. He said the pin's bent where it's been yanked, not unclipped, and it's last year's design. He swears they changed the crest this spring. "Then either someone is frugal," Purbright said, "or someone wanted an old badge to be noticed." He moved the envelope to the corner of the board where wayward items go when one has no wish to forget them, only to postpone their company. They returned to the square to find the mayor attempting consolation by committee, which is to say badly. Councillor Hargreaves hovered near the tea tent, insisting the tragedy should not overshadow the town's spirit of unity, a phrase which, in the light of events, had acquired the texture of a wet biscuit. Purbright asked after the Carnival Queen. "Resting," said Hargreaves, "a shock to a young lady. She is at Mrs. Crick's, the dressmaker's, with her chaperone and a great deal of smelling salts." He managed to imply that smelling salts were a sign of moral failure. Mrs. Crick's shop smelt of starch and difficult choices. The Queen, Lena Marsh, a hairdresser's assistant with clear eyes and a face that would have looked honest even if she had been lying, sat with the sash across her lap, stroking the frayed ribbon end as if it were a pet she had nearly lost. "They told me to be at the Corn Exchange at 3, she said, voice still small from earlier. "I was ready at 5 past. Then this," she showed the snapped clasp, "went again, and Mrs. Crick had to sew it while I stood like a lamp post." By the time we set off, we heard the screaming. I never got to the window. She looked at Purbright as though asking whether she should apologize for this failure to perform. "Did anyone urge you to delay?" Purbright asked. Lena shook her head. "Only a message sent this morning to the salon." Another silly thing. It said, "Don't lean out too far. Some would like you to fall. Signed, an admirer." I laughed. Girls get notes with hearts on them and notes without. This one had no heart. She attempted a smile, failed neatly, and let the sash drop, revealing a red mark where the ribbon had rubbed her shoulder. Love, who distrusted admirers as a class, made a face. Back at the Corn Exchange, they found the young clerk who had delivered the earlier note waiting in the hall with a stricken politeness that made him look 12. He gave his name as Peter Dodd and his occupation as messenger, and whatever else is wanted. He swore he had not written the 7 words. A woman thrust it into my hand by the church railings and said, "Take that to the inspector. Hurry." Mask on, like the children. I couldn't see her face. He swallowed. She wore gloves. Peacock blue. There was a smudge on one finger as if she'd touched wet paint. Purbright returned to the window and looked down upon the square again, as if the cobbles might have rearranged themselves into a more helpful pattern while he was away. "Mr. Pike," he said softly, "went to check a window arranged for someone else. The ribbon that delayed someone else is torn, not cut. A note announces a mistake. A badge that should not be here insists on being seen." He turned to Love. "If a man spends weeks ensuring precision, what persuades him to step into chaos at the very moment allotted to ceremony?" "Duty, sir," Love offered. "Or a call for help." "Or the knowledge that something would go wrong," Purbright said. "So wrong that he either meant to prevent it or to take someone's place." They stood in the stairwell while the last of the evening light salted the banister. From below came the half-hearted cheer of a child who had won a coconut and a parent who had not wanted to carry it. Love glanced towards the square where the mayor was beginning a speech about resilience to an audience of pigeons. "If the note's right, sir," he said, "who was meant to be the one?" The mayor. He was in full view on the dais. The Queen? She was scheduled for this window. Purbright's eyes went to the program again, where neat type had promised delight at punctual intervals. He tapped the line reading, "Queen of the Carnival, window 3:15, and said in the tone of a man inviting arithmetic to do what it could, "Sometimes a schedule is a confession written disguised as reassurance." At that moment, Mrs. Pegg hurried up with a parcel of lost property and set it down on the desk with the relief of a woman giving away a secret. "Found behind the curtain, sir. Didn't belong to Mr. Pike. I've seen him wear no such thing." She unfolded tissue to reveal a pair of peacock blue gloves, the right forefinger smudged with a streak of varnish the color of fresh ribbon. The discovery of the gloves produced more unease than certainty. Sergeant Love stared at them with the fascination one might reserve for a serpent in a basket. "So she left them behind," he said. "The woman in the mask." Proof she was here, Purbright turned the gloves over in his hands. The smudge on the finger had dried to a darker crust, almost black in the light of the office lamp. "Proof, perhaps," he murmured, "or a suggestion." Items in mysteries are seldom what they declare themselves to be. Still, one takes what one is given. The following morning, Flaxborough attempted to wash away the scandal with industriousness. Stalls reopened, though customers came more to whisper than to purchase. Bunting was rehung as if to prove the town could not be undone by a single corpse. The mayor, looking 10 years older, insisted that life must proceed as planned. His voice trembled, however, whenever the corn exchange entered his line of sight. Children played skittles in the square, but their laughter came in odd bursts, too loud, as though to disguise glances over their shoulders. It was in this brittle atmosphere that Purbright began his inquiries among the committee members. Mrs. Harbottle, head of the Women's Guild and commander of the refreshment tent, greeted them with a tray of rock cakes dense enough to withstand artillery. "Roland Pike was an exacting man," she declared, polishing her spectacles as if she might remove a stain from memory itself. "He corrected the hymn sheets last year when he was merely a steward. The vicar still bristles, but he kept accounts clear and honest. A treasure." She sighed as if the pun had just occurred to her, and she disapproved of it. When asked if she noticed anyone behaving oddly before the fall, she pursed her lips. "Oddly. In Flaxborough. That's rather like asking if anyone has a nose. But if you mean suspiciously, then I might say Councillor Hargreaves had been most insistent that the Queen use the town hall balcony, not the corn exchange window. He muttered about tradition being tinkered with. Mr. Pike, however, would not hear of change. Later, in the reading room of the public library, Purbright and Love found Mr. Cribb, chairman of the Carnival's finance subcommittee, or as he styled it, chief guardian of the purse. He wore a suit the color of porridge and smelled faintly of ledger ink. "A shocking waste," he said, shaking his head not at the death, but at the prospect of lost ticket sale. Roland Pike was meticulous, true, but he insisted on paying musicians promptly, which I call reckless. Cash flow is the artery of an event, Inspector, and he had a way of bleeding it. Love raised an eyebrow. "Any quarrels, sir?" Cribb adjusted his tie. "Quarrels? In accounts. We had discussions, naturally. He said the raffle prizes must be purchased from reputable traders. I said a cousin of mine could supply items more affordably. He insisted on receipts. Always receipts." He smiled thinly. "Now you may call that honesty. I call it suspicion masquerading as virtue. By the time they left the library, the town had brewed 3 new theories. One claimed the mayor had arranged the fall to distract from overspending on the fireworks. Another swore Pike had been seen arguing with a stranger in a grey coat. A third, whispered outside the post office, held that the Carnival Queen's own father had once lost money to Pike in some private scheme and had taken revenge. Each theory had 2 qualities. It was improbable, and it was believed with enthusiasm. Love tried to record them in his notebook, but the ink could hardly keep pace with the creativity of Flaxborough tongues. That afternoon, Purbright stood in the square watching the children rehearse their penny-catching for the Queen's delayed appearance. He noted how each jar had a strip of cloth tied to it for identification. One boy's jar bore a ribbon of the same scarlet shade as the torn piece found at the window. The boy explained proudly, "Mum works for the draper." Said Mr. Pike ordered 4 yards, Special Purbright crouched to examine the ribbon end. Neatly cut, not torn. He filed the image away beside the jagged piece taken from the sill. "When scissors are available," he said softly. Tearing is a choice. Sergeant Love was less patient. Weave gloves from a woman who may not exist, a badge from a lodge that may or may not matter, and a ribbon torn when it needn't have been. Meanwhile, the town is inventing culprits by the hour. He closed his notebook with a snap. "We're being misdirected, sir." Purbright regarded him with something approaching pride. "Yes, Love." "Precisely. Misdirection is the sincerest compliment paid to an investigation. It means we are close to something worth hiding." They took tea at the Lamb and Flag, where the landlord produced cups large enough to drown suspicion. In the snug, 3 regulars discoursed with relish. "Mark my words, it was political," one said. "Pike had papers. He knew about the council's little overspends." Another leaned in. "Nonsense. The Queen was the target. Jealousy, that's what. A girl with a crown attracts enemies." The third shook his head with authority. "I tell you plain, it's a lover's quarrel." Gloves don't lie. Their voices dropped when they noticed Purbright nearby, then rose again when they realized he listened without interruption. The inspector's method, though seldom advertised, was as effective as a warrant. Let others expose themselves by trying to impress him. Back at the station, the investigation board acquired new lines of chalk. Purbright wrote, "Target," above the square of clues. Underneath, he listed Pike, the Queen, and the Mayor. 3 possible recipients of malice, he said. Each had reason to be present, each had reason to be absent. Love asked which he believed most likely. "That," said Purbright, "depends on whether the note was truthful or false. Truth in 7 words is unusual. Lies fit more comfortably in short sentences." As the day's light drained, the Carnival square filled again for the evening concert. Lanterns bobbed, music played gamely, and townsfolk did their best to laugh. Purbright and Love walked among them like men in another country. Near the sweet stall, a woman in a plain coat brushed past, leaving a faint scent of varnish and violets. When Love turned, she was already gone into the crowd. On the ground where she had stood lay a scrap of program paper, torn neatly from the timetable. Written in ink across the margin were 4 words: "Look to the balcony." Purbright held it to the lantern glow, expression unchanging. "Theatrical," he said. "Someone desires an audience." Love frowned. "Another trick?" "Every trick," Purbright replied, "tells us what the conjurer fears we shall discover without it." The concert ended in ragged applause, but Flaxborough's attempt at normality could not survive the whispering. By the time the crowd dispersed, the gloves were remembered, the badge discussed anew, and speculation about the balcony circulated with renewed vigor. In the hush that followed, the inspector stood at the edge of the square and looked up at the Corn Exchange, dark against the night. The window gaped like a missing tooth, and the balcony beneath it cast a shadow both long and misleading. Saturday morning brought clear skies, as if the weather itself were determined to cooperate with the Carnival Committee's vow that the scandal would not overshadow festivities. By 10 o'clock, the square had filled again with bunting, brass instruments, and the stubborn cheer of townsfolk who refused to let a corpse dangle in their memories longer than politeness required. The mayor had decreed that the prize-giving would proceed at the bandstand. "Unity and resilience," he proclaimed, rehearsing his phrases with the air of a man determined to be quoted. Sergeant Love confided to Purbright, "If there's a second disaster, sir, it'll be death by oratory." The set piece began with pomp. The Carnival Queen, Lena Marsh, stood pale but steady in her repaired sash, the clasp reinforced with stitching visible even from the front row. Children crowded at the foot of the dais, jars ready to receive coins. Behind them, the band tuned up in fractured snippets of Sousa. Stall holders fanned themselves with programs, gossip dripping from their lips like honey from spoons. Purbright watched it all with his customary mild absorption, as if he were observing not an event, but a pattern repeating itself. The mayor drew breath to announce the raffle winners when chaos struck. The prize table, carefully draped in embroidered cloth, trembled as though nudged by an impatient ghost. Then, with impeccable timing, the first prize, a polished silver cup intended for the best decorated float, toppled forward, scattering raffle tickets like startled birds. Gasps rose, laughter fluttered, then froze as the second prize, a carved wooden clock, pitched sideways and shattered on the cobblestones. For a heartbeat, it seemed mere clumsiness. But when the third prize, a wicker hamper heavy with wine, slid with deliberate steadiness and crashed to the ground, red liquid soaking into the cloth like blood, the crowd shrieked and surged back. "Sabotage," muttered Love, rushing forward to steady the collapsing table. He righted it with the help of 2 volunteers, but the cloth had slipped aside to reveal the true trick. One leg of the table had been sawn almost through, leaving it to collapse with the slightest pressure. Purbright crouched and ran a finger along the cut, smooth and pale against the darker wood. "A craftsman's hand," he said. "Not a child's mischief." The mayor, crimson as his sash, attempted to rally with a speech about fortitude, but his voice was drowned by a woman's cry, "It's a warning!" First Pike, now the Queen. Attention snapped to Lena, who stood rigid, her bouquet trembling in her grip. A handful of coins spilt from her sash pocket, scattering at her feet. Children darted instinctively to snatch them, only to be dragged back by anxious parents. The Queen's chaperone hurried her away under a cloud of whispers. Community voices rose like a storm. "They want her gone, that's plain," cried a shopkeeper. "It's the council, covering their mistakes," claimed a man in a bowler hat. "It's the lodge business," countered another. "That badge wasn't dropped for nothing." Theories multiplied as quickly as the raffle tickets swirling in the breeze. Purbright allowed the babble to continue a moment before lifting the broken clock. The hands had stopped at precisely 3:15. He held it aloft and said, "One cannot help noticing how timepieces insist on dramatics. They seldom stop by accident at the very hour we were warned of." Love looked bewildered. "You mean it was set, sir?" "Or persuaded," Purbright replied. By afternoon, Flaxborough was buzzing with renewed excitement. Children reenacted the table's collapse, adding embellishments of explosions and masked villains. Adults speculated with grave authority over tea and sponge. At the library, Mr. Cribb muttered about insurance claims. At the church, the verger whispered that divine judgment had found the carnival wanting. At the Lamb and Flag, the regulars placed bets on who would be named the culprit by week's end. Each retelling grew more elaborate, which pleased the community almost as much as the event itself. Purbright and Love examined the sabotage table in the station yard. The saw cut had been deliberate, neat, and hidden beneath the cloth. "Someone wanted spectacle," Purbright said. "An accident in the square, before a crowd." Fear is the louder cousin of gossip. Love tapped the broken leg. But why risk being seen? They could have done this last night. Purbright nodded. Precisely. It was done after dawn, when watchers are few but suspicions, once discovered, are plentiful. One leaves such a gift to be found, by accident or by intention. Late that evening, a messenger arrived with a parcel addressed to Inspector Purbright. Inside lay a child's carnival mask, painted with a grotesque grin. Across the inside, written in hurried pencil, were the words, "The Queen was spared once." Next time she won't be love-paled as he read it aloud. Purbright folded the mask and placed it in an envelope. "Misdirection again," he murmured. When warnings repeat, one suspects the author wants them overheard rather than believed. Yet the effect on the town was electric. Parents kept children home from rehearsals. Councillor Hargreaves thundered in the newspaper about dark elements seeking to poison our community spirit. Mrs. Harbottle declared she would suspend the refreshment tent until certain persons were arrested. And still, beneath outrage, excitement simmered. Flaxborough had been granted not merely a scandal, but an unfolding drama, with each resident an eager spectator and potential actor. Purbright, reviewing his chalkboard late that night, added 2 new words, clock and mask. He drew arrows to ribbon, badge, gloves, and note. The web thickened. Love hovered anxiously. So the Queen was the target after all? Purbright shook his head, or she is meant to believe she was. Fear makes obedience, and obedience makes splendid cover for the truth. He paused, chalk poised. The real question, love, is who benefits from her silence, her retreat from public gaze. For in her absence, someone else commands the stage. The square outside had fallen quiet, lanterns extinguished, confetti blowing like dead leaves. But in Flaxborough, silence was never the absence of talk, only the preparation of tomorrow's theories. By Sunday morning, Flaxborough had worked itself into the rare condition of unanimous agreement. Someone must be arrested. It hardly mattered who. The square, tidied after the calamity with the efficiency of long practice, seemed to bristle with indignation. Shop windows displayed bunting more defiantly than before, as if patriotism might itself serve as a disinfectant. The newspapers, always hungry for scandal, carried 2 front-page photographs. The dangling figure of Roland Pike, tactfully blurred, and the wreckage of the prize table, tactlessly vivid. Between them lay a column of speculation that pointed nowhere and everywhere at once. Sergeant Love entered Purbright's office, clutching a report. "It's Cribb, sir," he announced, with the excitement of a man about to unwrap a mystery. "Several witnesses claim they saw him in the Corn Exchange on Friday evening with a saw, and he quarrelled with Pike about the raffle funds. Love produced a statement from a stall-holder who had glimpsed a porridge-coloured suit in the stairwell, and another from a lad who swore he heard someone muttering about cutting losses. Pretty clear, don't you think?" Love concluded, his eyes bright with certainty. Purbright regarded the evidence with the expression he reserved for weather forecasts. Interesting, possibly accurate, but seldom decisive. "Mr. Cribb enjoys muttering," he said mildly. "As for a suit the colour of porridge, half the town owns one. Yet we shall inquire. They found Mr. Cribb at home in a semi-detached villa on Daisy Lane, pruning roses with the concentration of a man editing a ledger. He greeted them with a stiff nod and insisted on serving weak lemonade before answering questions. "Sawing?" he repeated, scandalized. "The only thing I saw was this branch, which threatened to disoblige my climbing variety. As for quarrelling with Pike, I disagreed with him, yes. He demanded receipts for every halfpenny spent, which I considered a slur on my honor. But murder, sabotage, absurd." He set down the secateurs and wiped his hands with an exaggerated flourish. "Gentlemen, do you imagine me so foolish as to jeopardize my standing for the sake of a raffle?" Love pressed him. "And yet witnesses place you at the Corn Exchange." Cribb sniffed. "I delivered a box of hymn sheets to the upper hall. The choir required them. If someone chose to interpret my presence as criminal, that is the hazard of living in a town that prefers scandal to sense." He straightened a stack of newspapers on the sideboard with unnecessary vigor. "Now, if you are finished, I must prepare the accounts for the concert. Transparency is vital in times of crisis." His smile suggested transparency was valuable chiefly because it showed others where to stop looking. As they walked away, Love whispered, "Guilty, if ever I saw a man guilty." Purbright replied, Guilt does not advertise itself in such neat columns, love. If it did, detection would be as simple as arithmetic. He paused before adding, "Yet it is useful that the town believes him guilty. A false suspect draws attention, and while eyes are fixed, other hands may move." That afternoon, the gossip wheel spun at double speed. In the tea rooms, patrons nodded sagely that Cribb had always been a shade too careful. At the churchyard, mourners whispered that Pike had uncovered embezzlement. At the Lamb and Flag, the verdict was unanimous. It's Cribb, no doubt. Always did look like a villain in spectacles. The notion gained so much ground that by evening the mayor suggested, loudly, that police take decisive action. Councillor Hargreaves even offered to escort Cribb to the station himself. Mrs. Harbottle, from her command post at the refreshment tent, declared she would no longer serve lemonade until the guilty party is behind bars. Yet, amid the clamour, subtle details emerged. The choir, questioned about their hymn sheets, confirmed receiving them at precisely the hour Cribb claimed. The box bore his neat handwriting. A delivery boy recalled seeing him carry it up the stairs. Purbright, instead of disappointment, seemed quietly satisfied. "An innocent suspect provides splendid camouflage," he told Love. "It keeps the true culprit in shadow, while the crowd enjoys its theatre." In the evening, Purbright strolled through the square alone. Lanterns swayed in the breeze, casting restless shadows on the Corn Exchange wall. From a shuttered window above came the faint sound of a radio tuned to a waltz. On the cobblestones lay a scrap of ribbon, crimson, neatly folded, as though placed there rather than dropped. Purbright pocketed it without comment. Behind him, voices debated Cribb's guilt with gusto. He smiled faintly, as if amused by the town's determination to solve the crime by referendum. Later, back at the station, Love reviewed the evidence board with increasing frustration. "We have ribbon, gloves, a badge, a mask, a note, and now this broken clock. We've also got a town ready to string up Mr. Cribb, and yet not one thing actually proves who killed Pike." Purbright tapped the chalk against the board. "Proof arrives late to most parties. What comes first are signals, objects moved, warnings written, accidents arranged. They are designed to hold our attention while another matter proceeds quietly." Love frowned. "Another matter?" Purbright nodded. "Yes, Love. One seldom saws a table leg for the sake of theatre alone. There is a profit hidden in the noise." The next morning's newspaper carried a headline of triumphant certainty: "Cribb questioned by police." In fact, he had merely been invited to the station for tea, but Nuance rarely sells papers. The article hinted at motive, opportunity, and even a mysterious foreign connection, none of which bore resemblance to truth. Flaxborough read it with delight. By noon, shopkeepers were wagering how long before Cribb confessed. Children chanted rhymes about Cribb the Cutter. The man himself marched grimly through town, ledger under his arm, daring anyone to contradict his innocence. Purbright observed the performance with the calm of one watching weather change. "The town has chosen its villain," he said, "which means the true mischief-maker may now act without scrutiny." He turned the folded scrap of crimson ribbon in his hand. "This is not over. It is only beginning." As dusk settled, a new rumor surged. The Carnival Queen was to withdraw from all further duties, citing fear for her safety. Mothers approved, fathers grumbled, and children bewailed the loss of penny-throwing. But Purbright, hearing the news, remarked softly, and thus the stage is cleared. Who, one wonders, has been waiting for their entrance? Monday dawned with a guilty brightness that made Flaxborough feel almost respectable again. The council, nervous of being blamed for idleness as well as tragedy, announced a public safety demonstration at the Corn Exchange. The balcony rail would be inspected, the confetti cannons tested, and the town shown that authority possessed both competence and screws. The mayor arrived in a suit that threatened to burst from valor, Councillor Hargreaves with a folder of regulations, and a modest crowd with the appetite of people who hoped for reassurance but would gladly accept a disaster if that was what Providence felt like providing. Mrs. Pegg, the caretaker, had burnished the stair rails until they shone with the virtue of polished brass. "Everything mended," she told Purbright in a whisper that implied she'd done it herself, plus a prayer. The Carnival Queen was absent by doctor's orders. Her chaperone hovered, explaining to anyone who would listen that the girl had taken to tea and trembling. Purbright, mild as a cat in sunlight, moved among fittings and fastenings with a curiosity that left no mark. Sergeant Love, a step behind, carried a notebook and a look of wary hope, as if the balcony might confess simply to avoid disappointing him. The confetti cannons were mounted along the stone coping, brass valves gleaming. A young technician in an ill-fitting boiler suit demonstrated the timing mechanism and pointed at a pocket watch he had placed beside them. "Electric trigger from below," he said proudly. "On the quarter, we can give the square a shower of colored paper." The mayor declared it excellent and asked only that the paper be patriotic. Hargreaves peered over the rail with the caution of a man contemplating both height and liability. "This rail," he said to Mrs. Pegg, "was sound on Saturday?" "Sound until sin touched it," she replied with satisfaction. Love examined the bolts. "New washers," he observed, "and something gummy." He touched a fingertip to the threads and frowned. "Resin." "Pitch," Purbright corrected gently. "It gives the illusion of tightness. In warm weather, it softens, and what was firm goes obligingly loose." He did not add that pitch is convenient for mischief that wishes to masquerade as mischance. He seldom explained a thing until it had finished explaining him. At 11, the demonstration began. Purbright stood to one side of the window where Roland Pike had fallen, gazing not down at the square but along the line of stone, as if the balcony itself were a sentence with a crucial clause. Below, a modest audience arranged itself with the dainty appetite of people at a public hanging who pretend to be there for the education. The mayor raised a hand, was about to speak, and then, because destiny appreciates a cue, the rail gave a small, surprised sigh. It shifted outward with a decorous little groan and then lurched, scraping metal against stone, the sound brutally intimate in the enclosed space. Hargreaves was the nearest. He clutched the coping with both hands and uttered a syllable that history has not preserved. Love seized his elbow and anchored him while two constables threw their weight against the rail. Screws skittered like beetles across the floor. The crowd below gasped into a silence that felt cold. The young technician reached for the cannons as if they too might jump. Purbright, who had not moved, put one hand under the rail where it had sagged. "Gently," he said. "Let it lie." When it settled, he pointed not to the failed bolts, but to a strip of crimson cloth wedged beneath the bracket. "That," he said, "does not arrive by accident." Love fished it out with the delicacy of a conjurer producing the wrong rabbit. It was ribbon again, torn into a thin twist and knotted. The knot, tightened by pressure, had acted as a shim beneath the fitting, preventing the bracket from sitting true. Over time, or under force, it would wobble free. The mayor spluttered about sabotage, Hargreaves about inquiries, the crowd about miracles. Purbright turned the ribbon in his fingers. There was a smear along it, dark where it had mixed with old grease, and a smell faintly sweet beneath the dust. "Varnish," he murmured. Love leaned close and nodded. "Same scent as the gloves," he said, and looked suddenly pleased with himself. "Violets and varnish." Mrs. Pegg, who had been standing very straight, now allowed her shoulders to settle. "If I may," she said. "This was wedged before Saturday. I felt a wobble when I polished on Friday night. I told Mr. Pike. He said he would see to it. He took the program proofs to check them up here, said he liked the quiet, and I left him with his careful look." "Program proofs?" Purbright asked. Mrs. Pegg fetched from a drawer like a reliquary a folded sheaf stamped draft in blue. The page for Saturday showed a timetable nearly identical to the one pinned in the office, save for one difference that, once noticed, rang like a bell. At 3:15, the line read, "Mayor's address from Corn Exchange window." Not the Queen's wave. Purbright held the sheet to the light, turned it once, then twice. Pencil had struck through the line, and above it a neat hand had written, "Queen of the Carnival, window." A second hand, heavier, had ringed it. On the margin, in Roland Pike's precise script, change confirmed, C. Hargreaves. The mayor coloured as if told he had been caught in his shirt sleeves. "We, made an alteration for reasons of tradition." Hargreaves drew himself up. "The mayor's address from the town hall balcony has always been the custom," he said. "Mr. Pike agreed to restore it. He, being fussy, insisted on amending the print. Purbright's mild eyes did not leave the page. And the Queen, more photogenic perhaps, was to occupy this window in his stead. Then Mr. Pike, fussy as you remark, came to check the arrangement. He leaned out where someone had prepared a rail to fail elegantly. And someone wrote, he wasn't meant to be the one." The shift in the crowd was almost visible. Suspicions, which had perched upon Mr. Cribb with comfortable weight, took wing and flew to new roosts. "So the target was the mayor," someone breathed, to the mayor's immediate injury. Another voice hissed, "Or the Queen, made to stand where the man was intended." A third, eager, said, "Hargreaves had it moved." Hargreaves blanched with the indignation of a man forced to attend his own nomination as villain. "I insisted on tradition to prevent foolishness," he snapped, "and had I not done, the girl might have—" He stopped, seeing his sentences end and disliking it. Purbright returned the proofs to Mrs. Pegg. "Who handled these between printing and Friday?" "Mr. Pike," she said at once. "He kept them with his other papers." He disliked surprises. He disliked, Purbright thought, the wrong person taking a fall. From the stairwell came the sound of hurrying feet and the smell, borrowed from another memory, of violets and something chemical. Love swung round in time to see a woman's silhouette vanish along the corridor. Hat brim low, a flash of peacock blue at the wrist. He pelted after her, shoes loud on boards, but by the time he reached the entrance, he saw only a smear of fresh varnish on the banister and a scuff where a heel had slipped on dust. Outside, the crowd had dissolved into speculation. A van pulled away, its side painted with a draper's name. "Who was meant to be the one?" Love demanded, returning breathless. "The mayor by the timetable, the Queen by the revision, and Pike by habit." "Someone," Purbright said, "arranged for either dignitary to be sacrificed under the cover of a festival, knowing that the shock would feed for weeks, while something else fattened in its shade." He looked at the rail, at the ribbon knot, at the tidy pencil note. Change confirmed. C. Hargreaves. And Mr. Pike, too careful by half, stepped into a gap left for someone else. In the afternoon, the town's theory engine, supplied with this new fuel, produced a fresh list of culprits. Hargreaves was named, with relish, the mayor with caution, the Queen's chaperone by a minority that favoured melodrama, and Mrs. Crick, the dressmaker, by those who smelled varnish and thought of ribbons. Mr. Cribb, to his astonishment, was abruptly declared obviously innocent, which did little to improve his temper. The lodge badge returned to conversation. Who among the lodge had keys? Who despised the mayor? Who could saw, glue, polish, and vanish, leaving only violets behind? Back at the station, Purbright added proofs and pitch to the chalkboard. He drew a new triangle, Mayor, Queen, Pike, and beside it wrote, intended, allocated, accidental. Love studied it as one studies a puzzle whose picture changes when you look away. "Set piece number 2, he said almost cheerfully, "and the suspects have danced round again. They will dance a while yet." Purbright replied. But their steps are telling. He touched the knot of ribbon with a finger. This is a tidy mind at work, love. A tidy, theatrical mind. That night, as lanterns bobbed over the square and the town resumed its effort at gaiety, a parcel arrived at the police station without a return address. Inside lay a second child's mask, this one painted with a tear. Across the inside, in the same hurried pencil, "Look to the accounts." Love groaned. At last. Money. Purbright smiled as if at an old friend. Mischief often begins in arithmetic. Let us see what Roland Pike balanced, besides himself. Tuesday began with a drizzle that varnished Flaxborough's pavements until they shone like pewter. In the police station, the parcel from the night before lay open on Purbright's desk, the child's mask with its penciled instruction gazing mournfully upward. "Look to the accounts," it commanded in the same nervous hand as before. Love tapped it with his pencil. "Someone's determined to send us on errands, sir. First the balcony, now the books." Purbright replied mildly, "Errands are revealing. One must ask not only where they lead, but why their author prefers we follow those particular paths." The accounts in question were Roland Pike's treasure, bound in a ledger so meticulous it could have served as the town's moral compass. Columns of figures marched neatly across the pages, each item cross-referenced with receipts, each total squared off in ink as clean as a hymn. Yet when Purbright ran his finger down the final pages, he stopped at a sum that faltered like a misplayed note. "Here," he said softly, "wine for the prize hampers. Paid twice, once in March, once again in May. 2 different suppliers, 2 different prices, and here again, fireworks, listed under 2 firms, one with an address I do not recall in this county." Love leaned in. "So Pike was covering fraud?" "Or discovering it," Purbright replied. "The sums are small but cumulative. Enough to embarrass, perhaps to ruin, if shouted from a platform. They summoned Mr. Cribb, still simmering from his recent public trial by gossip. He arrived carrying a briefcase as if it were armor. "If you propose to slander me again," he began, "let me remind you my solicitors are not idle." Purbright slid the ledger across the desk. "We seek clarity, not slander. These entries, would you say they were an honest error or deliberate duplication?" Cribb adjusted his spectacles, his indignation temporarily suspended. "Deliberate, certainly. But not by Pike. He would have noticed at once. More likely inserted in the committee drafts before reaching him, he pointed at the fireworks entry. This firm, Loon and Company, I know of no such business. Someone fabricated it, which suggests our treasurer uncovered the trick and was preparing, well, perhaps a disclosure. Love asked, who would benefit from skimming small sums? Cribb's mouth twisted. Benefit? The mayor likes his projects oiled with untraceable shillings. Hargreaves loves a little discretionary fund. Even Mrs. Harbottle could do with spare cash for her infernal sponge recipes. But to murder for it? Absurd. He shut the book with a snap, though his eyes lingered uneasily on the falsified lines. By midday, the drizzle had thickened to a fretful rain. Purbright and Love called on Lena Marsh, the Carnival queen, who received them in Mrs. Crick's parlour. She was pale but less tremulous, the sash folded neatly beside her like a flag at half-mast. I heard about the balcony, she said quickly, as if determined not to be excluded. They told me it might have been me. But Mr. Pike, he was kind, always careful. He said the accounts must be checked thrice before anyone touches them. He wanted me to smile for photographs, nothing more, but I think he knew something. He asked me not to stand too close. To the mayor during rehearsals. Said he preferred I keep to the other side. She lowered her eyes, as if he thought danger might come from a friendly arm. Mrs. Crick bustled in with tea and spoke before she set the tray down. The mayor visited twice last week, measuring this and that. Said it was for speeches, but mayors do not stitch sashes. Pike asked me to keep the old drafts he marked. Said, one day these may prove useful. He was troubled, Inspector. Trouble written across his forehead as plainly as chalk. She produced from a drawer a folder of papers, faintly scented with varnish. Purbright opened it carefully. Inside were duplicated invoices, notes in Pike's hand comparing amounts, and at the bottom a letter addressed but never posted. To whom it may concern. Concern. Evidence of misappropriation. Carnival funds. It broke off mid-sentence, unfinished, the pen blot suggesting interruption. Love muttered, "So Pike was going to blow the whistle?" Purbright replied, "Perhaps. Or perhaps he feared someone else already had." That evening the town gathered for the postponed choir performance in St. Swithin's. The nave filled with damp coats, whispered theories, and a pious air of expectation. At the climax, as the hymn board was changed for the final number, the verger dropped a slate, revealing behind it a folded envelope wedged into the frame. Gasps spread like a new verse. The vicar passed it to Purbright with trembling fingers. Inside lay another note. Unity is bunting. Tug, and it falls. The phrase echoed Purbright's own words from the first day. Love stared. "Someone's quoting you, sir." Purbright folded the slip. Imitation is a compliment, Love, and sometimes a warning that one's audience is too close. Outside, rain hammered on the church roof while the crowd debated anew. Some declared Hargreaves guilty beyond doubt. Others insisted the mayor had orchestrated both fraud and tragedy, and a few murmured about secret societies in peacock blue gloves. Theories churned faster than the water in the gutters. Yet beneath the gossip, Purbright sensed a quiet hand-steering, notes appearing at crucial moments, objects planted to be found, disasters staged with theatrical timing. A director behind the scenes, conducting both fear and speculation. Back at the station, he studied the chalkboard, now crowded with words. Ribbon, badge, gloves, mask, note, clock, proofs, pitch, accounts. He circled accounts and drew a line to Pike. The treasurer saw too much, they murmured. He leaned out to check what another had tampered with and found himself where someone else was scheduled to stand. The masquerade continues, Love, but every performance leaves fingerprints of timing. Love asked, "And what do the fingerprints show?" Purbright smiled thinly. "That our culprit is no gambler. They prefer rehearsed accidents, tidy ledgers of deceit, and spectacles designed for gossip. A tidy mind, perhaps too tidy." The rain eased at midnight, leaving the streets shining with reflections of lanterns. From the corn exchange window, shadows moved as if rehearsing another scene. Purbright watched from the square, hands in his pockets, and said quietly, "Tomorrow, Love, we shall attend to those who sign receipts." For paper trails, however carefully varnished, rarely conceal every knot in the ribbon. By Wednesday, the drizzle had lifted, leaving Flaxborough wrapped in a pearly light that made even its most begrimed brickwork look freshly scrubbed. It was, Sergeant Love observed, the sort of morning when people feel compelled to polish their reputations. And indeed, several of the Carnival committee members appeared eager to do just that. They called at the station, uninvited but insistent, each with explanations that sounded suspiciously like rehearsed monologues. First arrived Mrs. Harbottle, formidable in her hat and carrying a basket of rock cakes as if pastry might serve as a character witness. She perched on the chair opposite Purbright and announced, "I have nothing to conceal, Inspector, but I am weary of tongues wagging my name into knots. If anyone tells you I misused carnival funds for flour and currants, let them know I bake from my own pocket." Purbright inclined his head, thanked her for the cakes, and asked why she thought her name had entered the gossip. "Because I am capable, that's why," she snapped, "and capability is always suspected. Pike never doubted me. He praised my balance sheets. He even said once that my sponge was the only honest one in the county. That's more than most men can boast." Her eyes misted suddenly, but she blinked the sentiment away, set down her basket, and left with her head as high as the church steeple. Next came Councillor Hargreaves, still smarting from whispers that he had engineered the balcony change. He spoke in the tones of a man addressing posterity. "Tradition is the spine of this town. I insisted on the town hall balcony, because the mayor has always spoken from there. Pike meddled, as was his nature. He liked columns and corrections, but he lacked imagination. As for murder, do I look like a man who would risk my career for a few shillings in duplicate invoices?" He smoothed his tie with injured dignity. "Besides, I was in the mayor's parlour at the very hour Pike fell, drafting our speech on unity. Ask his wife. She will confirm. A dull alibi, but unassailable." In the afternoon, the mayor himself appeared, perspiring even in the cool light, accompanied by his secretary, who looked as though she wished to be anywhere else. "Unity, Inspector," he began, "is the town's greatest need. These scandals divide us, and division is the enemy of prosperity." Pike was diligent, yes, but he lacked the warmth required of a public man. He insisted on receipts for trifles, which is no way to cultivate generosity. He dabbed his brow. "Now I am accused of fraud, I who has dedicated every ounce of strength to this community. Let me assure you, Inspector, I could no more defraud the Carnival Fund than I could rob my own mother's collection plate." The secretary, looking down at a notebook, betrayed no opinion. Purbright thanked him gravely, noting the mayor's speech contained not a denial of opportunity, but an excess of adjectives. Later still, Purbright and Love paid a call on Lena Marsh, the Carnival Queen. She was seated in Mrs. Crick's workroom, the sash folded neatly beside her, her hands busy plaiting a length of ribbon with a kind of nervous grace. "They say I was the target," she murmured, not quite meeting Purbright's gaze. "But I cannot believe it. Who would wish harm to me? I sell shampoos and set hair, that is all." Her eyes flickered towards the sash. "But Mr. Pike worried. He said the carnival had become too much like theatre, with someone behind the curtain pulling strings." She paused, then added quietly, "I think he feared for the mayor. He said speeches make enemies quicker than accounts do." Mrs. Crick, bustling in, had overheard enough to interject. "The girl was never meant for politics, Inspector. She's a crown for photographs, nothing more. But men like Pike imagine plots where there are none." Her tone, brisk and practical, suggested she considered crime an inconvenience, like moths in fabric. Yet when she offered them tea, Purbright noticed a faint scent of varnish lingering about her fingers. He asked, almost casually, what she had been working on. "Stage props for the amateur dramatics," she replied too quickly, then laughed. "A town needs its diversions. Not everything painted is sinister." That evening, Purbright convened what he called, with a faint smile, our investigation board in human form. He gathered Love, Cribb, Mrs. Harbottle, Hargreaves the mayor, and Lena in the reading room of the library, ostensibly to clarify schedules, but really to observe their interplay. They sat at a long table beneath the dusty portrait of a benefactor whose stern face had witnessed many quarrels. The conversation began politely, but soon sharpened. Cribb accused Hargreaves of vanity. Hargreaves called Cribb pedantic. Mrs. Harbottle scolded them both like schoolboys. The mayor thundered about unity while Lena twisted her ribbon and looked ready to vanish into the wallpaper. Purbright intervened only once to remark, "It is curious how quickly figures become personal when entered in the wrong column." The room fell briefly silent, then filled with a new round of denials. When the meeting dissolved, Love whispered, "It's like watching a stage play, sir." Everyone performing, none confessing. Purbright nodded. "Yes, Love. And every performance reveals the part not meant to be played." He added the word performers to the chalkboard back at the station, drawing lines between the names. A play with 3 acts, he mused. First the fall, then the sabotage, then the accounts. Our cast expands, but the script remains tidy. As the library emptied, a small incident occurred that Purbright considered more telling than all the speeches. Lena dropped her plaited ribbon. Hargreaves stooped to retrieve it, but Mrs. Harbottle reached first. For an instant, the two clasped the strip together, then released it as if it burned. Purbright, observing, said nothing, but his eyes lingered on the ribbon long after the room was empty. That night, Flaxborough's gossip mill turned more personal. People spoke less of accidents and more of characters. Mrs. Harbottle was described as domineering, Cribb as miserly, Hargreaves as vain, the mayor as slippery. Lena was declared too innocent to be believed, which was itself a suspicion, and Mrs. Crick, who had lived peacefully in her shop for 20 years, was suddenly whispered about as if she kept arsenic in her pincushion. The town, having exhausted theories of sabotage, now debated psychology with relish. Purbright, standing at his office window, listened to the mutter of rain returning and said softly, "When a town ceases to discuss accidents and begins to discuss people, we draw nearer to truth. For accidents are convenient, but character is persistent." Love, yawning over the ledger, asked, "And whose character, sir, seems most untidy?" Purbright replied, "That, love, is precisely what tomorrow must reveal." Thursday brought a brittle sun, and with it the promise of renewed order. The council chamber, a long hall smelling faintly of polish and old quarrels, filled with aldermen, clerks, and an audience drawn by the magnet of scandal. On the agenda were mundane items, parking meters, allotment fences, but everyone knew the true purpose: to prove the town had not been shaken beyond its dignity. Inspector Purbright attended quietly, seated near the back with Sergeant Love, who tugged self-consciously at his tie. "It's theatre, sir," Love whispered. "Every man here's rehearsed his lines." Purbright nodded. "Then let us see who forgets theirs." The mayor opened proceedings with a pompous declaration about resilience. He spoke of unity, progress, and the Carnival's proud traditions. His voice echoed with the energy of a man speaking not to the chamber, but to the newspaper headline he hoped would follow. Councillor Hargreaves shuffled his notes, waiting his turn, while Mrs. Harbottle sat in the gallery with a basket of cakes, as if civic discourse might require sustenance. Cribb glowered 2 rows back, spectacles flashing whenever the mayor mentioned honesty. Lena Marsh had been persuaded to attend for the sake of appearances. She sat pale and self-contained, her sash carefully folded on her lap. The first half of the meeting plodded through allotments and lamp-posts, while the audience whispered impatiently. Then, as the clerk prepared to introduce Carnival accounts report of treasurer, deceased, the chamber door banged open. A boy stumbled in, clutching a bundle of papers, and cried, "Inspector, this was in the mayor's car." Gasps rippled. The mayor blanched. Purbright rose, accepted the bundle, and examined it with calm detachment. Inside were duplicate invoices, identical to those in Pike's folder, bearing forged signatures. "Receipts for payments," Purbright observed aloud, "to firms that do not exist." The mayor sputtered. "Outrageous! I never saw those papers. Anyone might have slipped them in." Hargreaves seized the moment to thunder. "This proves what I said all along." There are dishonest hands about the chamber erupted in argument. Accusations shouted, denials flung, the gavel rapped like a drum. Love muttered, "Set piece number 3, sir." In the chaos, another sound cut through. The choir organ above the dais bellowed a discordant blast. All heads turned upward. The hymn board, recently repaired, wobbled on its hooks. Then, with theatrical precision, it toppled forward, scattering hymn numbers like frightened pigeons. A great cry rose as the board struck the floor, narrowly missing Lena. She swayed, clutching her sash. A mother screamed. A clerk fainted. Purbright alone remained still, his eyes fixed not on the board, but on the narrow gap behind it where something glinted. He strode forward, reached into the debris, and withdrew a length of wire, its end wrapped in crimson ribbon. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice mild as tea, "we may conclude this accident was as rehearsed as a hymn." The chamber fell into uneasy silence. The mayor dabbed his forehead. Hargreaves shouted for an inquiry. Cribb muttered darkly about conspiracies. Mrs. Harbottle declared it a disgrace, and the townsfolk in the gallery murmured with relish that they had witnessed history. "First the fall, then the table, now the hymn board," someone whispered. "We'll have statues of accidents at this rate." Lena whispered to Purbright, "Why do they keep aiming at me?" He answered softly, "Perhaps they are not. Perhaps you are meant to believe you are, which is not the same thing." Back at the station, Love chalked wire and council papers onto the board. "So Cribb's innocence looks firmer, the mayor looks shadier, and poor Lena looks targeted again." He rubbed his chin. "But if she's not the real mark, then who is?" Purbright studied the web of clues. "A stage requires an audience," he murmured. "Our culprit wishes for maximum attendance, maximum astonishment. The Queen, the mayor, even Pike, they are props. The true target lies not in a person, but in control of what follows. Influence, accounts, reputation." He tapped the duplicate invoices. "These are not about pounds and shillings. They are about leverage." That evening, gossip achieved operatic proportions. The tea shop declared the mayor corrupt. The pub named Hargreaves. The church insisted it was divine punishment, and the draper's customers whispered that the gloves had been seen on Mrs. Crick's counter. Each faction argued with the passion of profits. Children reenacted the hymn board's collapse with cardboard props. Flaxborough, which thrived on scandal the way plants thrived on rain, blossomed into full bloom. Purbright took a slow walk past the Corn Exchange. Lanterns flickered, banners fluttered, and the balcony loomed. Silent now, but heavy with memory. He paused at the square where Pike had fallen, as if listening for an echo only he could hear. "Unity is bunting," he murmured, recalling the notes. "But bunting tears neatly only when guided." Love, standing beside him, asked, "And who's guiding it, sir?" Purbright smiled faintly. "The hand that knows gossip is the strongest mortar. And that hand has not yet tired of pulling ribbons." As they turned back toward the station, a messenger intercepted them, breathless with urgency. He thrust a postcard into Purbright's hand. On the back was written in the same hurried scrawl as the other notes, "Tomorrow at dusk, the truth will appear in lights." Love stared. "Fireworks, sir. They're promising a revelation at the display." Purbright folded the card with care. "Then tomorrow, Love, we shall keep our eyes not on the sky but on the crowd. For fireworks illuminate more than stars. Friday evening arrived with the peculiar anticipation only fireworks can stir. The Carnival square bristled with stalls, lanterns, and families wrapped in coats, children clutching penny jars and paper flags. Overhead, the sky sagged with twilight clouds, a velvet curtain waiting for its cue. The townsfolk whispered that the promised revelation in lights would surely crown the festival with either glory or disgrace. Some expected a confession spelt across the heavens. Others, a calamity that would make all earlier mishaps look like rehearsals. Purbright, standing at the edge of the crowd with Sergeant Love, merely observed the restless shifting, the speculative glances, the eagerness for drama. "When an audience is promised spectacle," he remarked, "one can be certain it will arrive. The only uncertainty is who directs it." The fireworks display had been arranged on the common beyond the Corn Exchange. Racks of mortars and rockets, gleaming brass tubes, waited like soldiers in review. A small crowd gathered at the perimeter rope, admiring the orderliness of destruction to come. Among them, Councillor Hargreaves bustled, issuing instructions about spacing and safety. The mayor, crimson with both importance and nerves, rehearsed his brief speech. Lena Marsh, pale but composed, was persuaded to attend for symbolic unity, flanked by Mrs. Crick and Mrs. Harbottle, the latter clutching a handbag as though ready to smite any saboteur. Cribb lurked behind, scowling at every misstep in arrangement. "A stage," Love whispered. "All the cast are present." Purbright nodded. "And one more behind the curtain." At 9 o'clock, the mayor mounted a small platform and raised his hand. The crowd hushed. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, Flaxborough stands united. Tonight our fireworks—" His words drowned in a sudden shriek of a rocket, launched prematurely. It tore upward, scattering sparks, before exploding low, showering embers dangerously close to the audience. Panic rippled, children squealed, and mothers dragged them back. Love rushed forward, but Purbright caught his arm. "Wait," he murmured. "Observe." Another rocket flared sideways, spinning across the square like a fiery serpent. It struck the facade of the Corn Exchange, where it fizzled out in smoke and char. The crowd gasped as letters appeared, traced in sparks. "Unity is bunting." The phrase, lifted from both Purbright's lips and the anonymous notes, hung for a moment before dissolving into darkness. The crowd broke into a clamor of shrieks and arguments. Some swore it was sorcery, others deliberate sabotage. "They're mocking us," cried Hargreaves, shaking his fist at the sky. The mayor flailed for order. Lena clutched Mrs. Crick's arm, eyes wide. Mrs. Harbottle declared it sacrilege. Only Purbright remained tranquil, studying the racks of spent fireworks. He stepped closer, ignoring the constables struggling to herd the crowd. On one of the mortars, a strip of crimson ribbon dangled from the fuse. He touched it lightly, then bent to examine the firing mechanism. The wire had been spliced with a small pocket watch, set to trigger at 9 precisely. Yet the premature rocket had gone off moments earlier, at the mayor's first words. "Sabotage time to speech," Purbright said. "Our culprit prefers punctuation." Love, panting beside him, asked, "But to what end, sir?" "To frighten. To humiliate." Purbright looked toward the Corn Exchange, smoke curling from its facade. "To convince us that accidents and warnings are part of a single script. And while we argue over theatre, the real matter proceeds unobserved." The constables recovered order. The mayor spluttered promises of inquiry. The crowd, disappointed yet titillated, dispersed in noisy knots, rehearsing tomorrow's theories. Purbright and Love walked back to the station under lanterns that trembled in the night air. "It's the same hand each time," Love insisted. "Ribbon, varnish, timing, all pointing to the same person. But which? Hargreaves with his tradition, Cribb with his accounts, the mayor with his speeches, or Mrs. Crick with her paint and ribbons?" Purbright smiled faintly. "All have motives, but only one possesses the necessary temperament, a tidy mind that cannot resist theatrical flourishes. Consider the clues, Love. They are not clumsy. They are precise, rehearsed, symmetrical. Such minds cannot help but reveal themselves." Back at the station, Purbright set the ribbon and watch upon the chalkboard shelf. He added fireworks to the list and drew a new triangle linking ribbon, timing, and accounts. "Observe," he said, "how every act is staged not for secrecy but for the audience. Each event, a public fall, a collapsing table, a wobbling balcony, a tumbling hymn board, fireworks writing slogans, none designed to kill cleanly, all designed to astonish." Love frowned. "Then Pike's death, was it really murder, sir? Or another accident?" Purbright's eyes softened. "It was murder, Love. The only difference is that our culprit staged it so convincingly as an accident that we continue to debate. Pike discovered the falsified accounts. He threatened exposure. He was placed in the Queen's position at precisely the moment a weakened rail and torn ribbon would do the rest. Every later spectacle is camouflage, distraction, reinforcement. The carnival itself has become a mask. Silence filled the office. Outside, the town still murmured, speculation running like a second tide. Love rubbed his eyes. If all these were misdirections, then tomorrow, Purbright finished quietly, is when misdirection ends. Our culprit must be revealed in full daylight. Because theatre cannot last forever, even the curtain must fall. At that moment, a constable entered, flustered with another envelope. It had been pushed under the station door, addressed in the same hurried scrawl. Tomorrow noon, Corn Exchange. Final performance. Inside was a single line. One last accident will close the show. Love groaned. Another promise. Who's next, sir? Purbright folded the note with care. The last accident, Love, is meant to silence suspicion permanently. But it will end not in silence, but in explanation. The inspector closed his chalkboard with a decisive clack. Tomorrow, we draw back the curtain. The town expects theatre. Let us give them revelation. Noon brought a brittle brightness to the Corn Exchange, as if the sun, like the town, had decided to see matters clearly for once. A notice had gone out that morning. Public safety inspection, confetti cannon reset, unity address, which drew a crowd with the appetite of people who had learned that truth, like fireworks, is best enjoyed in company. The mayor arrived wearing resolve like a fresh boutonniere. Councillor Hargreaves stalked about with a face composed for vindication. Mrs. Harbottle held a paper bag that bulged with rock cakes, a domestic answer to disorder. Mr. Cribb turned up to be exonerated or arrested, whichever would finally quiet the town. Lena Marsh stood pale and upright, the repaired sash across her shoulder. Beside her, Mrs. Crick smoothed an invisible crease from the skirt nobody else could see. Purbright asked them all upstairs. The window from which Roland Pike had fallen stood open, the balcony rail now shored with honest bolts that glinted like new teeth. Two constables hovered at the door. From below came the hum of the townsfolk, backs tipped to sunlight, eyes lifted to the stage they had made of their own civic building. Sergeant Love set a small parcel on the sill, an item wrapped in brown paper and tied with crimson ribbon, then stepped back and took his place near the cannons. "Ladies and gentlemen," Purbright began mildly, "Flaxborough has been given theatre these last days. A fall before a crowd, a table that collapsed on cue, a hymn board that obeyed a conductor we did not see, fireworks that spelt slogans, a balcony that waited politely for its turn. One might suppose chaos reigned. I suggest the opposite. These were rehearsals. Tidy, symmetrical, precise." His eyes rested for the briefest moment on Mrs. Crick's varnished fingers. Today's invitation promised a final performance. We shall oblige, but with a change in program. A murmur, not unlike the wind stirring hymn sheets. Purbright lifted the parcel and tugged the ribbon. The knot came away in one smooth pull, the ends twisted in the same curious left-handed turn that had wedged itself beneath the bracket 2 days earlier. He drew from the paper a small pocket watch, its hand set to the hour and pinned to a length of wire. This, fixed to a firing circuit, would have launched the confetti cannon outward at noon, he said. Our crowd below, startled by a blast, would look up. A second tug, this rope, already threaded through the rail, would have sent the basket of draft programs down upon the mayor. He indicated the rope's path, subtle as a hemstitch along the coping. A final accident, neat as a seam. Hargreaves bristled. Preposterous. Who would? A tidy mind that cannot resist theatrical symmetry, Purbright said. A mind that thinks in cues and curtains. A mind with glue on its fingers and schedules in its pocket. A mind that took pity, at least once he turned to Lena. Miss Marsh, your clasp, who mended it when it failed at 3:10? Mrs. Crick, Lena whispered. She stitched it twice. And who delayed you with a tape while the scream went up? Purbright's voice softened. The same hand that cut a table leg with a neat craftsman stroke, that tied a left-handed knot in crimson ribbon, that rubbed pitch into threads to make a rail obedient to the weather, that planted last year's lodge badge from the amateur dramatics costume cupboard to point at convenient enemies. Who painted props with varnish that smells faintly of violets? Who wrote notes in pencil on program paper and tucked them where audiences gather? Who slipped duplicate invoices into a car at a moment guaranteed to produce uproar? Who, when the schedule first placed the mayor at this window, prepared the rail to fail? Then, when tradition moved him to the town hall and set the queen here instead, contrived to keep the girl away with a broken clasp, a slow stitch, only for Mr. Pike. Fussy, honest, to lean out to check what someone else had tampered with, Mrs. Crick laughed, a small, dismissive sound. Inspector, I hem costumes and thread needles. This is melodrama. Indeed, Purbright replied gently. Your art? You told us so yourself. Stage props for the amateur dramatics. Varnish on your hands. Peacock blue gloves with a smudge on the forefinger found behind the curtain. A delivery van from the drapers outside the stair when you ran. The shop records show a rush order for 4 yards of crimson ribbon at your request, charged to special events. Your saw, borrowed from the church hall workshop, matches the cut on the prize table leg, the same shallow start, the same tidy finish. He held up the pocket watch. And this, yours, engraved inside to CC by a fond sister. Your initials, Mrs. Crick Color, rose slowly into her face. Lena's fingers, searching for an anchor, found Purbright's sleeve. The accounts? Mr. Cribb said hoarsely. If she wanted our mayor's head, why the invoices? To ensure a head rolled even if the rope snapped, Purbright said. Roland Pike discovered the skimming. He drafted his letter, to whom it may concern, and kept proofs, as careful men do. Mrs. Crick, who sees all the town's hems and hears all its confidences, knew the little leaks and the large ones. She despises sloppiness. She despises vanity. She chose theatre because theatre is the only thing that makes Flaxborough listen. The mayor would be disgraced by evidence, the crowd would be kept obedient by spectacle, and if the wrong person fell, he let the sentence hang. Mrs. Crick's voice, when it came, had shed its shop-front brightness. The mayor's fingers were in every saucer, she said. Hargreaves too, with his little envelopes. They smiled and told the girl to lean where a man ought to stand, because a photograph of a crown fetches votes. Roland Pike. He was a bore, but he was honest. I meant to spare the girl and finish a job Mr. Pike started, but would have bungled. I wrote to you, Inspector. I told you where to look, and pushed us where you preferred we look, Purbright answered. While you arranged the next curtain, he inclined his head, not unkindly. A pity. You might have made an excellent detective had you tolerated imperfect endings. Down in the square, a ripple of sound, impatient, curious, reached them like surf. Purbright stepped aside. Mrs. Crick, I must ask you to come quietly. She looked toward Lena then, something raw showing through the tidy seams. They would have used you and forgotten you, she said. At least with theatre they remember. For a heartbeat she seemed prepared to make a last flourish. One arm flicked toward the rope, but love had already eased it from the bracket. The constables moved in with the polite inevitability of stagehands closing a scene. Hargreaves found his voice. Arrest her, he barked, as if commanding the weather. And the mayor? Someone asked from the doorway. For news travels uphill as swiftly as down. Purbright said. The mayor will answer for invoices to firms that do not exist and funds that traveled in circles until they vanished. He will find, I think, that unity is more easily declared than audited. They went downstairs into the light. The crowd parted, not unlike a curtain. Purbright spoke plainly, sparing theatrics, setting each piece where it belonged. The ribbon knot beneath the bracket, The peacock gloves, the planted badge, the sawn table, the timed fireworks, the hymn-board's wired fall, the duplicate accounts, the drafts that moved a speech from window to balcony and back again. If you notice the left-handed knot, he added softly, or the varnish scent on the gloves, you are right. A susurrus of satisfaction passed through the assembly, that pleasant warmth Flaxborough reserves for being clever together. Lena stood very still, then let out the breath she had been holding since the first scream. Mrs. Harbottle dabbed her eyes and declared that rock cakes would be provided at cost for the constabulary. Mr. Cribb looked at the sky as if it had finally given the correct change. Hargreaves stared at his polished shoes and discovered them less eloquent than he had hoped. The mayor attempted a statement on integrity and was advised to make it at the station. Later, as the square emptied and bunting flapped with unthreatening innocence, Love said, "You were kind to her, sir." Purbright shook his head. "No, only accurate. A mind like hers cannot help neatening chaos into drama. But in the end, truth is untidy and must be endured without props." He glanced at the balcony, its bolts honest and dull in the sun. "Come, Love. There's paperwork. Even the theatre closes its books.